Hello there and welcome back to another review. Today we're going to be having a look at Once Upon a Time in China 3, starring Jet Li, directed by Tsui Hark. Now, not a lot of people like 3, not a lot of people are necessarily fans of 3. Not to say they don't like it, I think a lot of people just feel it doesn't compare to the first two movies. And while that sentiment and that statement is largely true, in many ways it is slightly inferior to the first two movies. I mean, you know, make no mistake, Once Upon a Time in China 3 is still entertaining. Even if it does miss the mark on a few of the things that made the other two so great, it still is a worthwhile film, and it's still worth checking out if you like, say, your Jet Li and you enjoyed the first two movies. Made in 1992, again directed by Tsui Hark and starring Jet Li and Rosamund Kwan. Like much with the first two movies, Hark enjoys showing sort of the mythology of Wong Fei-hung rather than sort of an actual biopic of sorts. For example, in this movie, he gets in front of a movie camera at one point, and I think in real, like, Wong Fei-hung's lifetime, I don't think that would have ever happened. I don't think that ever did happen. I don't even think there's, like I say, any photographs of Wong Fei-hung. I'm not even sure, but I don't think, like, movie cameras would have happened in his lifetime. Like with many things, printing and showing the myth sometimes is a lot more interesting from a consumer point of view rather than showing it exactly beat for beat, sort of how the story was. It's much easier, like, fun and entertaining sometimes to sort of, you know, embellish things a little bit and, you know, make it more entertaining for the audience. And like I say, it's sometimes much more fun to do that, and that's exactly what Tsui Hark does here. We still get the same themes here in this movie, foreigners intruding on China. Fei-hung, though, in this movie is becoming more acceptable to Western things. If you remember, like, from the first two movies, Fei-hung was very sceptical of sort of Western intervention, and sort of there was a lot of unrest and nervousness in China, and that's very much put front and centre, and it still is in this film. But the Wong Fei-hung character that Jet Li plays in this movie, he's a lot more acceptable to the change, and he's acceptable to, like, sort of Western things and customs and things like that. Though I think the film is you could argue this film out of all of them is probably the more personal of the three so far. We'll get round to reviewing Once Upon a Time in China 4 and 5. I will get around to that, but I'm just trying to sort of go in order. But I think it's a really personal film in terms of Wong Fei-hung and, like, Aunt Yi and their relationship, and in many ways that is sort of brought forward, and the plot and the villains and the evil guys are all sort of second place in this movie, and in many ways the film sort of lacks depth a little bit in the level, in that the antagonists are not really, you could argue it's probably a simpler film compared to the other two as well. The whole thing that runs through these films is the idea of, you know, moving forward, accepting that times change, some things are just out of our control, and that is something Hark continues very much so within this movie. As I say, it was really nailed home in the first two movies, and that sort of still plays and carries on here. As mentioned, I will go as far to say as well, this is probably, in terms of plot and what actually happens in the movie, I'd probably say it's the most simplest and sort of the easiest one to watch. I mean, 1 and 2 are sort of very epic in nature. This one is still epic, but it's not as epic. And like I said, I think there's a bit of simplicity with this film. It's almost like Tsui Hark and Jet Li was not trying necessarily as hard this time to sort of do something amazing. It was just sort of in many ways, let's just sort of have fun with it. Maybe let's relax a little bit. Let's put our foot on the brakes a little bit. I think as well what works is it doesn't, you know, where I say it's simple, it doesn't become self-indulgent. You know, it doesn't become patronising. It doesn't sort of like try and preach anything necessarily. The film encompasses, like, the Forbidden City, lion dances, etc. So that scope and visuals, they're still very much there that you would get in the first two movies. It's still very much, you know, Tsui Hark doing his thing. Just what you would expect from a Once Upon a Time in China film. I'm not sure if it's ever been clear while Jet decided to sort of throw in the towel here at this point, why he didn't want to do any more. I mean, I know he returned for China and America, but I think communications must have broken down for whatever reason, and you know, like with all things that happens, I'm sure money was involved in one way or another. I'm sure money would have been a part of it. Maybe they wasn't offering him enough for the role or something like that. But it's a shame he didn't come back to do 4 and 5, but he did return, as I mentioned, for China and America, which I will get round to doing, reviewing. As you know, with the way the film ends here, I'm pretty sure it's not how like Tsui Hark would have probably necessarily planned it. You know, with like Wong Fei Hung just throwing down a prize at a lion dance and just sort of walking off. So I'm pretty sure that's not how he would have liked to have ended sort of the Jet Li chapter of Once Upon a Time in China movies, but we'll be getting into it today. But it's not, I mean, like I say, this film has taken a bit of flack over the years. Oh, it's not as good as 2. Oh, it's nowhere near as good as 1. And like I say, that is largely true, but it's very entertaining nonetheless. So it opens with this like empress and everyone paying their respects to her, mention of foreign devils right away and how they like destroyed warships. And to cut a long story short, they're going to have like a lion dance competition. Okay, that's save your time. To cut a long story short, they're going to have a lion dance competition. I think Yun Bun was our fight choreographer on this movie. There was no Wu Ping on this one. Go to Beijing and we meet Wong Fei Hun and Lung Fun. Again, this time played by Max Mock. There's no Yun Bu. Again, I'm afraid. I mean, he was sorely missed in 2 and he's sorely missed here as well. Max Mock, despite all his great efforts, he's just not Yun Bu, unfortunately. The ever lovely Rosamund Kwan as 13th aunt, and we learn she has a Russian friend who works for the consulate, and this guy is so cocky. Like, you hate this guy right away, right? This Russian friend that she has is just a pain in the arse, okay? And he's so cocky, you hate him right away. He's like, I'm gonna say, he's like, you must still love me. You still have the camera I gave you. It's like, well, she probably has the camera you gave her because she's getting use out of it, not because she's like still has like, you know, her heart is still yearning for you or anything like that. I mean, Fei Hung hates him, we hate him, you get the picture. And I love how, like, Fei Hung in this movie is more protective of Aunt Yi. Going back to what I said earlier about the film being a lot more personal, he's a lot more protective of Aunt Yi. He's very emotional in this film in regards to sort of her. He gets jealous of her. He really does show his emotions more compared to the other movies. So they've travelled to Beijing to basically meet Wong Fei Hung's father, Wong Ke-ying, as he is opening his new medicine factory. Notice as well the camera moves here that Tsui Hark does when you watch the movie, that he does so well, usually sweeping or panning across the scene, and it really, I'd say, some amazing camera work from Tsui Hark here that really does show off the scope of the movie. So a gang turns up saying Wong Ke-ying and his students can't compete in the lion dance, and we get a really fast flying fight scene where we meet Ghostfoot 7 or Clubfoot, played by Hung Yang Yan. And he usually in the movies was usually Jet Li's stunt double. He was also, if you've seen Double Team with Van Damme, he has a little small part in that. But incredible footwork here, and just like I say, he plays Clubfoot. Ke-ying gets all injured, and of course Fei Hung turns up after the altercation, right? So he misses out on that completely. Funny scene I like when you have Foon and all the students trying to sit down even though they have weapons stored in their clothing, which keeps the comedy happening as well quite nicely. 13th aunt Rosamund Kwan wants him to tell his dad that they are getting married, and they're like using like a steam engine as such in their medicine factory. And I love when she goes to kiss him when loads of steam comes out so no one sees, and he goes all red. And like I say, in terms of the personal aspect of this film, Aunt Yi and him is very much a story of them two, you could say. As I say, the antagonists and, like to say, the villains in this movie, it's kind of second place, but it's very much a Wong Fei Hung and 13th aunt type of film. It's making the movie a bit more intimate, and I was going as far as to say as well, when I say simpler, even lighter in tone compared to the first two. Great scene where Jet is using like a piece of fabric to stop these like different schools from fighting, sweeping them with it, etc. And as you would expect, his speed is insane. Fei Hung not happy. This line dancer's caused like schools to fight against one another and wants to bring it to the court. He's not, like I say, this line dance is causing lots of friction. It's causing lots of fighting in the streets. And Fei Hung's like, right, you know, something's got to change. After doing so, going to the court, Fei Hung and 13th aunt get like separated as they take rickshaws, and Clubfoot comes out to attack him. The wire work they use here, especially on Clubfoot, is nothing short of breathtaking. Really, while the fights in this movie are not as sort of quote unquote classic as say 2, there's some good fighting in 1 as well, but when you watch this scene where after they've gone to the court and like sort of Clubfoot's attacking him, as I say, I just love how wild he is and the whole fighting style. As I say, like he's like a wild animal and like a great fighter. And bear in mind, this is all outside and the wire work and everything, and it really, really is a sight to behold. So all you have really is this evil clan, school as such being dicks, basically. That is the villain so far. There's this evil like school, they're just being a pain in the ass. That is all that's going on. So that's our villains. So as mentioned, 13th Arts gets like a video camera, and Lung Foon sort of ridicules him because Fei Hung doesn't know what action meant. And Foon, to my knowledge, would never have done that. Lung Foon would have never spoke to his master like the way he does here, which I thought was so much out of character for Lung Foon. The way he sort of puts Fei Hung down because he didn't know what action meant. There's no way he would have spoke to like Wong Fei Hung like that. Just no way. So after learning the camera was from Aunt's Russian friend, Fei Hung sort of sulks and goes into like a bad mood. And I love how they pay homage to the scenes in the previous movies where she's always trying to touch his shadow, which I think was a nice, sweet, like I've mentioned in my previous Once Upon a Time in Channel 1 and 2 reviews, which I reviewed ages ago now. But when she is trying to touch his shadow and she's having these moments where he's not embracing her, but she tries to touch his shadow when he's not looking, it's them moments that really do. I like the sweet moments, the subtle moments. And also as well in this, he calls her by her first name, Tsui Hark, implying they are getting closer and more intimate, as I say, with that idea of intimacy and like personal. Like it runs through this film, like that. It's a very deeper, I think, connection between the two here, which is why this film shouldn't be disregarded. It's great that Hark has developed them in a relationship sense, and I think a lot of people after the shows, I mean, bearing in mind in 2 you had Yuen Woo Ping doing the fight choreography, you had Donnie Yen, you had them two having 2 amazing fights together, you had him like Wong Fei Hung taking on the White Lotus. So it's nice that in this film, like I do think that the idea was to dial it back a bit. And like I say, and it's nice that Hark doesn't just keep things the same. He does move their relationship forward. So we have all these different lines in like an opening ceremony coming from the street, the day like factory being the evil, like I think it's the Ping factory being the evil gang and clan, and you just can't argue with the colours of this movie. It really does look vibrant, colourful, and wonderfully directed. It's where the 4 sort of main underworld gangs are sort of presenting themselves. So like Foon disguises himself as one of the lions to take part in the festivals as K-Ying students. Even Lung Foon in this has a very small role compared to the past 2 movies, which is not a bad thing. As I say, Matt Smart, despite his best efforts, nothing against the guy, but I mean, if it was choice between him or Yuen Bu, I'd much rather have Yuen Bu as Lung Foon. So here, like I say, he goes to take part. Jet Li taking on all the lion's heads, even at one point using double spear. While this is all going on, Clubfoot is chasing Foon, who gets crushed by some horses, and a stable sort of crushes him in the process. All the while, 13th Arts has she's lost her camera, and during the commotion, her Russian friend wanders off to aid someone, but we don't know who. Like, you know, this guy's sort of there's something going on with this Russian dude. Something's happening. He sort of wanders off to aid some, but like who, what, and why, we're not sure yet. So maybe all is not what it seems with this guy. We learn that he helped kill someone, basically, who was a double agent. Long story short, the Russians want to kill the Prime Minister. Again, I won't bore you 100% with all the plot details here, but the Russians want to kill the Prime Minister. There are some funny and comedic scenes in this movie, as you would expect. They still, you know, like, aren't you trying to teach Fei Hung English words like man and woman and I love you, where if you're a non-Cantonese speaker, may be a bit lost in sort of the translation and things like that, but it's still a funny, light-hearted comedy scene. So Clubfoot gets humiliated and bullied by Dai Ping and is deemed a cripple now and deemed useless in many ways. The movie is about redemption as well. I think redemption is another sort of thing that runs through this movie. And Fei Hung is like willing to help him and look after him, even though at first he is too sort of proud to accept Fei Hung's help. So his ex-boss turns up and invites Fei Hung to a banquet, a meal, and the wine he was going to drink is sort of laced with acid. Fei Hung susses it and sort of launches it at him, and he's like, you have insulted me, right? The guy's trying to poison Fei Hung. Fei Hung susses that it's like poison, launches the thing, he's like, you know, you have insulted me. And it's like, well, you was just trying to poison the guy. You know, I think that probably trumps me just throwing a glass at you. So what? Because I didn't drink your acid. I've insulted you, have I? Nice fight scene here where they put oil on the floor so Fei Hung can't do his stance properly, or his shadowless kick. And probably it's well worth mentioning that this is probably the best fight scene in the movie up to this point. And whilst none of the fights, like I think I mentioned, are necessarily as good or as fun as 1 or 2, it doesn't mean they're any less entertaining. You know, I think the thing is with this movie, it's just not as memorable, unfortunately. I think that's one of the problems with it. So we find out that Aunt Yi's camera was still rolling during the lion dance earlier and caught the Russians killing this spy. We have to say, like I always do, like Rosamund Kwan is as beautiful ever in this movie. So once she gets her case packed, once she gets like her case back at one point and goes to leave Fei Hung on a note. I mean, why was she going to leave at this point? I'm not too sure what was going on there. What wasn't she, going on entirely at this point in the movie? I mean, because their relationship has been great through the movie, and she actually likes Fei Hung, was actually getting jealous. So I'm not sure why she was sort of packing a bag and sort of ready to leave Fei Hung a note and just get out of town. I'm not sure what was going on there. As I say, because they've been getting on really well, so I was never sure what the whole packing the suitcase thing was all about. So she uncovers the plot about the spy they killed and finds this letter at the death scene, which is just said in passing, and find out about their plans to kill the Prime Minister. Fei Hung enters the line dance competition, as that is when they're going to do the hit. All quite like chaotic, the finale of this movie. Kei Young and Aunt Yi bring the camera along so they can film what the Russians are going to do. Then out of nowhere, the gang boss Chutin Bar brings out this huge lion with a great big massive head. This thing is massive, like it is gigantic. I mean, when you look at the amount of extras and the amount of people involved with this finale, it really must have taken some very thorough direction from Tsui Hark. And it is, let's say, I think that's another thing, like there's no sort of end fight as such. There's nothing you sort of take from this, like the end of the film, because it does, like I mentioned at the start of the review, it does really just end. It just sort of ends with Fei Hung just walking off. So the Russians confront Aunt Yi and he ends up getting shot by the other Russians. I mean, I'm not sure what the exact rules are of this lion dance, but it really does seem like anything goes in this thing. That there's no set rules in this lion dance, and it just seems anything can happen. I think this is another thing that people didn't like about this movie. As I say, like, there's no Donnie Yen, there's no Yun Bu, there's no end fight, that kind of film. It just it doesn't seem as epic as the other two. It's almost like in a way the novelty had worn off a little bit. Sort of let's quit while we're ahead type of thing. As mentioned, no real villain. They say like her Russian fan was a spy to sort of cover up the hit. Fei Hung wins the competition and throws the medal back at the PM and gives a lecture basically that they are all losers, as the PM is not perfect, even though he did save his life, and ends with him just sort of walking away. Like I mentioned, it just sort of ends with Fei Hung just throwing the medal back, I don't want it, and then just walking out there. It really could have done with like a post, like with regarding the ending, like a post lion, something after the lion dance scene, or a Wong Fei Hung montage or something. The film just abruptly ends. Of course, there was, like I say, there was Once Upon a Time in China 4 and 5 with Vincent Cao, or Chu Man-shuk, otherwise he's sometimes known, which of course I will, as I say, get round to reviewing, but I probably will review China and America first. But I'll say, if you've never seen Once Upon a Time in China 3, or you've heard bad things about it, please give it the benefit of the doubt, because it's really not as bad as some people make out. I think a lot of people give this film a hard time, but you have to remember with a lot of things, when a series or two films or any film that come before it has done really well, or is really good, or it's like sort of groundbreaking, following it up is always a big pill to do. And I think, like I mentioned a few times, I think they really were trying to dial things back a bit here, keep it a bit more simple, keep it a little bit more light-hearted, bring the Aunt Yi Wong Fei Hung relationship to the front. And that's what I do enjoy about this movie. I enjoy the performances from Jet Li and Rosamund Kwan. We get some nice fights here. Clubfoot is absolutely fantastic, and overall, whilst not as good as the other two, it's still really worth checking out. So thank you very much indeed for watching. I hope you enjoyed the review, and I'll see you again soon.
Don't concentrate on the finger, or you will miss all that heavenly glory.